Some people spend their entire lives believing they know exactly who their parents were. They trust the family photographs hanging on living room walls. They trust childhood memories softened by time. They trust the stories repeated during holidays and funerals because questioning those stories feels almost impossible. But sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden inside ordinary homes so successfully that even the people living there never realize the truth until it is far too late to escape what they uncover. And for Natalie Brooks, that moment began during a thunderstorm inside the house she thought she knew better than anywhere else in the world. 3 days after her mother's funeral, Natalie sat alone in the dark dining room surrounded by half-packed boxes while rain battered the windows hard enough to shake the old suburban house outside Chicago. The silence felt unbearable. Eleanor Brooks had been dead for less than a week, yet the house already seemed unfamiliar without her voice controlling every room the way it always had throughout Natalie's childhood. Then suddenly, just after midnight, the power failed completely. The lights vanished, the refrigerator shut off, and the entire house dropped into total darkness. Natalie searched kitchen drawers for candles before eventually remembering her mother stored emergency supplies somewhere in the basement. At first she hesitated because Eleanor hated anyone going downstairs unnecessarily. Even as a child, Natalie remembered being warned repeatedly to stay away from certain parts of the basement without explanation. Back then she accepted those rules because children rarely question boundaries established by controlling parents. But standing there alone at 42 years old, exhausted from grief and wine and silence, Natalie finally walked downstairs carrying only her phone flashlight while thunder echoed outside overhead. The basement smelled exactly the same as it had during childhood. Dust, old wood, damp concrete. Familiar enough to feel comforting for a few brief moments, until something unusual caught her attention near the back wall behind several old storage shelves. One section of the wall looked newer somehow, cleaner, almost hidden intentionally. Natalie pushed the shelves aside slowly, revealing a narrow locked door she had never seen before in her entire life. Her hands actually paused above the doorknob because something deep inside her already sensed opening that door would change everything. The lock itself looked old but recently used. After several failed attempts, Natalie eventually forced it open using tools from her father's old workbench nearby. The room behind it was small, windowless, and packed floor to ceiling with boxes Eleanor Brooks clearly never intended anyone else to discover. Newspaper clippings covered one entire wall. Cassette tapes stacked neatly beside old photographs. Folders filled with documents. Most disturbing of all were the pictures scattered across a metal desk beneath a single hanging bulb. Women Natalie did not recognize stared back at her from faded photographs dating back decades. Some looked frightened. Others appeared ordinary enough except for the fact Eleanor had hidden their existence completely. Then Natalie noticed one face repeated throughout multiple photographs. A young blonde woman around 20 years old standing beside Eleanor during the late 1980s. In one picture they appeared close enough to be sisters. In another, the woman held a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket while Eleanor stood beside her looking strangely tense. Natalie stared at the image for several seconds before realizing something terrifying. The baby looked exactly like her. Then she found the VHS tape. It rested alone inside a separate locked drawer almost like Eleanor wanted it discovered last. Black marker covered the label in rushed handwriting that immediately made Natalie's stomach tighten. If Natalie finds this, do not let her watch it. For several moments, she simply stood there staring at the tape, while thunder shook the basement walls around her. Her mother spent years controlling information inside that family with almost obsessive precision. Eleanor chose which stories survived and which disappeared quietly without explanation. Questions about relatives were discouraged. Childhood curiosities were redirected. Even Natalie's father Thomas rarely contradicted Eleanor openly, because tension filled the house whenever he did. Looking back, Natalie suddenly remembered strange moments she ignored for years. Family arguments stopping abruptly when she entered rooms unexpectedly. Her mother becoming visibly anxious whenever old photo albums appeared during holidays. The way Thomas avoided eye contact anytime Natalie asked about her Aunt Claire, a relative nobody discussed openly after the late 1990s. At the time, Natalie assumed every family carried uncomfortable subjects buried beneath the surface somewhere. But standing inside that hidden room, surrounded by evidence of secrets carefully preserved for decades, she realized something far more disturbing might have been hidden inside the Brooks family all along. Natalie carried the VHS tape upstairs, trembling badly enough she almost dropped it twice before reaching the living room. The storm outside intensified while she searched frantically for the old television and VHS player still sitting inside cabinets Eleanor refused to throw away. Every instinct told her to stop, to wait until morning, to call someone first. But curiosity mixed with grief creates dangerous momentum once certain questions begin forming inside the human mind. And Natalie could no longer ignore the largest question suddenly consuming every thought she had. Who exactly was Eleanor Brooks? The tape flickered alive slowly after several seconds of static. What appeared on screen first looked harmless enough. Old family footage, birthday parties, backyard gatherings. Eleanor younger and smiling beside people Natalie never remembered meeting. Then the footage shifted abruptly. A woman's voice started crying somewhere behind the camera. A man shouted angrily. The camera fell sideways briefly before capturing a terrified blonde woman staring directly into the lens. "If anything happens to me," she whispered desperately, "it was them." The tape cut immediately afterward into static. Natalie sat frozen on the living room floor long after the screen went dark. Her breathing changed. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Somewhere upstairs an old pipe rattled inside the walls while rain hammered the roof above her. But none of it mattered anymore, because the world she understood moments earlier no longer existed. Childhood memories started replaying differently inside her head almost instantly. Locked basement doors. Whispered arguments late at night. Her mother burning old photographs every few years during spring cleaning. Thomas Brooks drinking silently on the back porch whenever Claire's name surfaced accidentally during family gatherings. Suddenly those moments no longer felt random or harmless. They felt connected, intentional, constructed around something Eleanor spent her entire life trying desperately to bury. Then another memory surfaced that Natalie had not thought about in nearly 30 years. She was maybe 8 years old, standing in the kitchen asking an innocent question after discovering an old birthday card addressed to someone named Claire. "Why don't we talk about Aunt Claire anymore?" The entire room went silent. Eleanor slowly turned toward her with an expression Natalie suddenly realized looked more frightened than angry. Then her mother answered quietly, "Because some people destroy families." Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the story of Natalie Brooks is not simply about one woman uncovering hidden family secrets after her mother's death. It is about what happens when truth survives buried beneath silence for so long that entire lives are built on top of it. And by the end of this story, one question will become impossible to ignore. How far would a family go to bury the truth? At 42 years old, Natalie Brooks felt like someone rebuilding her life from scattered pieces long before she ever discovered the hidden room beneath her mother's house. Her divorce finalized only 8 months earlier after nearly 17 years of marriage, and the separation left her emotionally detached from almost everyone around her. Friends described her as intelligent but guarded, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke and rarely allowed anyone close enough to see genuine vulnerability. After Eleanor Brooks died unexpectedly from a stroke, Natalie returned to the suburban Illinois home she spent years avoiding because there was nobody else willing to handle the estate. Her father Thomas had passed away several years earlier, and most extended relatives barely communicated anymore except through uncomfortable holiday cards and brief phone calls. In many ways, Natalie already felt emotionally disconnected from her family long before she uncovered evidence suggesting they might have spent decades hiding something terrifying together. But grief changes people. It weakens emotional walls. And sometimes it pushes buried questions back toward the surface, whether someone is ready for the answers or not. The deeper Natalie explored the hidden basement room, the stranger everything became. The newspaper clippings alone stretched across nearly 15 years and focused obsessively on one unresolved disappearance from 1997 involving a woman named Claire Brooks. Natalie recognized the surname immediately, but confusion hit her almost instantly because nobody in the family ever spoke openly about a Claire Brooks except during rare awkward moments quickly shut down by Eleanor. According to the articles, Claire vanished suddenly at 23 years old after neighbors reported hearing a violent argument inside the Brooks family home late one evening. Police suspected foul play early in the investigation, but never gathered enough evidence to charge anyone directly. The official story claimed Claire left voluntarily after emotional struggles and financial problems. Yet the more Natalie read, the less believable that explanation sounded. Witnesses described Claire as deeply attached to someone she refused to leave behind. Anonymous tips hinted at hidden family conflicts investigators never fully uncovered. One article even mentioned rumors involving a child connected somehow to the disappearance before details abruptly vanished from public reporting entirely. Natalie reread that paragraph repeatedly because something about it unsettled her in ways she could not fully explain yet. Soon questions started multiplying faster than Natalie could organize them rationally. Who exactly was the blonde woman appearing beside Eleanor throughout the basement photographs? Why did her mother secretly preserve decades of newspaper clippings connected to an unsolved disappearance while publicly pretending Claire barely existed? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why did Eleanor label that VHS tape with a warning specifically naming Natalie herself? The possibility that her mother spent years hiding dangerous truths no longer felt paranoid after everything discovered inside the basement. It felt increasingly obvious. Natalie started sleeping less almost immediately because her mind refused to stop replaying fragments from the footage over and over again. The terrified woman staring into the camera. The phrase "it was them." The panic visible in her eyes moments before the tape cut abruptly into static. At first, Natalie tried convincing herself the footage could have been unrelated to her family entirely. Maybe Eleanor collected material from old local cases obsessively for reasons Natalie never understood. But deep down, she already sensed the truth sat much closer to home than that. Late one night, unable to stop thinking about Claire Brooks, Natalie searched the case online for the first time. She expected little beyond outdated newspaper archives and abandoned message boards. Instead, she discovered entire communities still discussing the disappearance decades later. Reddit threads analyzed old witness statements frame by frame. Amateur true crime investigators debated theories about what really happened inside the Brooks household during the summer of 1997. Some believe Claire staged her disappearance voluntarily after emotional instability worsened. Others suspected Thomas Brooks helped Eleanor cover up an accidental death during a violent family argument. More disturbing theories claimed multiple members of the family knew exactly what happened, but remained silent for years. Natalie read through hundreds of comments until nearly sunrise while slowly recognizing details matching memories from her own childhood. Strangers online discussed locked basement areas inside the Brooks house. Police visits neighbors vaguely remembered during the late 90s. Rumors of screaming heard through open windows one stormy night before Claire vanished permanently. Every new discovery made Natalie feel less like she was researching a cold case and more like she was uncovering hidden pieces of her own life. The paranoia intensified after anonymous phone calls started arriving 3 days later. The first call came just after midnight, while Natalie sorted old paperwork in the dining room. No caller ID. At first, only silence greeted her through the receiver before a man's voice finally whispered something barely audible. "Your mother protected you from this." Then the line disconnected immediately. Natalie stood frozen, holding the phone long after the call ended because fear had already started settling into the edges of everything around her. More calls followed over the next week. Sometimes breathing, sometimes silence. Once, a woman whispered, "Stop searching before you destroy what's left of your family." Natalie reported nothing because part of her feared making the situation public would somehow confirm the terrifying suspicions growing stronger every day. Instead, she isolated herself further inside the house, replaying VHS tapes, obsessively searching for details she missed earlier. The footage became almost hypnotic. Small gestures, strange expressions, conversations stopping abruptly whenever cameras shifted direction. The more she watched, the more obvious it became that the Brooks family spent years performing normalcy while something deeply unstable hid beneath the surface. Then Natalie discovered another tape hidden inside one of Eleanor's old winter coat boxes upstairs. Unlike the first VHS, this one contained no label at all. The footage opened with static before revealing a young blonde woman sitting alone inside what looked like a motel room sometime during the late 1990s. Natalie immediately recognized her as the same woman from the basement photographs. Claire. Her face looked exhausted and frightened in ways difficult to fake. For several moments, Claire simply stared nervously toward the camera while wiping tears from her cheeks. Then she finally spoke words that sent cold panic through Natalie's entire body. "If anything happens to me, it was them." Before Claire could explain further, loud shouting erupted somewhere off camera. Long before Natalie Brooks uncovered hidden tapes and buried family secrets inside her mother's basement, she had already become someone deeply skilled at emotional distance. Friends often described her as intelligent and composed, but there was always something slightly guarded about her, as though she spent years teaching herself how to avoid becoming too attached to anyone or anything. Her recent divorce only intensified that isolation. 17 years of marriage ended quietly without betrayal or dramatic scandal, which somehow made it feel even sadder. Natalie and her ex-husband slowly became strangers living inside the same house until eventually silence replaced intimacy completely. After the divorce, Natalie buried herself in work, avoided most social invitations, and convinced herself independence felt stronger than loneliness. But returning to her childhood home after Eleanor Brooks died reopened emotions she spent years suppressing successfully. The old house carried memories in every hallway, whether Natalie wanted them there or not. Smells from childhood, familiar creaking stairs. The grandfather clock Eleanor insisted remained perfectly wound every Sunday evening without exception. At first, Natalie believed sorting through the estate would simply provide closure before selling the property permanently. Instead, the house slowly began exposing fractures inside her memories she never realized existed. The deeper Natalie looked into her family's past, the more she recognized how carefully Eleanor Brooks controlled the emotional atmosphere inside that house throughout the 1990s. To outsiders, Eleanor appeared elegant, disciplined, and deeply respected within the suburban Illinois community where Natalie grew up. She hosted charity dinners, coordinated church fundraisers, maintained immaculate appearances no matter what happened privately inside the family. People admired her composure because Eleanor carried herself like someone who believed reputation mattered more than almost anything else in life. Even as a child, Natalie sensed her mother treated embarrassment like a form of danger. Curtains remained closed at certain hours. Family disagreements stopped immediately whenever guests arrived unexpectedly. Problems were handled quietly, internally, and without public attention. Eleanor rarely screamed or displayed obvious anger. Instead, disappointment became her primary weapon. One disappointed look from Eleanor Brooks could silence entire conversations instantly. Natalie spent years trying to earn approval that always felt slightly out of reach, though she never fully understood why the emotional distance between them remained so constant. Thomas Brooks existed differently inside the family. Quiet, nervous, careful with words. Natalie loved her father deeply because he often seemed like the only soft presence inside the house during childhood. Yet even as a little girl, she noticed something fragile about him whenever Eleanor entered certain moods. Thomas avoided confrontation almost automatically. If Eleanor grew tense during dinner conversations, Thomas changed subjects quickly. If Natalie asked questions Eleanor disliked, Thomas usually stared at his plate silently instead of intervening. Looking back years later, Natalie realized her father spent most of his life trying to keep peace inside a household built around unspoken tension. During childhood, she interpreted his quietness as kindness. Now she wondered whether fear explained more of it than she ever realized. Because beneath the carefully maintained appearance of the Brooks family, strange moments accumulated constantly throughout Natalie's early years. Arguments abruptly stopping whenever she entered rooms. Her mother locking the basement door repeatedly without explanation. Thomas drinking alone on the back patio late at night after everyone else fell asleep. None of those details felt alarming individually when Natalie was young. Together, however, they created an atmosphere that always felt emotionally unstable in ways difficult for children to understand clearly. One memory returned to Natalie repeatedly after discovering the hidden room downstairs. She was around 8 years old sitting at the kitchen table during Thanksgiving dinner while relatives filled the house with conversation and forced laughter. At one point, Natalie wandered into the downstairs hallway looking for old family photo albums because she wanted to show cousins pictures from when she was younger. While searching, she found a faded birthday card tucked behind drawers addressed to someone named Claire. The card included handwriting from Eleanor saying, "Come home soon." Natalie carried it innocently back toward the kitchen and asked the question children naturally ask when something does not make sense. "Why don't we talk about Aunt Claire?" The reaction stunned her even then. Every conversation stopped immediately. Silverware froze against plates. Thomas looked down at the table almost instantly. Eleanor turned slowly toward Natalie with an expression so cold and controlled it frightened her before a single word was spoken. After several long seconds of silence, Eleanor finally answered quietly, "Because some people destroy families." Then she stood up calmly, took the birthday card from Natalie's hands, and threw it directly into the kitchen trash without another explanation. At the time, Natalie accepted the answer because children often learn quickly which subjects adults refuse to discuss openly. But years later, sitting alone inside the same house replaying old tapes and reading newspaper clippings about Claire Brooks' disappearance, that memory transformed into something terrifying. Eleanor had not sounded angry when Natalie asked about Claire. She sounded afraid. That realization changed everything, because fear carries a completely different emotional weight than resentment. Suddenly, Natalie started remembering other strange details connected to Claire's name over the years. The way Thomas once dropped an entire glass after hearing someone mention Claire unexpectedly during Christmas dinner. Eleanor burning old photographs behind the house every spring while insisting she was cleaning out clutter. The basement door remaining locked constantly during certain periods of Natalie's childhood. Once, when Natalie was maybe 10 years old, she accidentally tried opening that basement door while looking for wrapping paper, and Eleanor reacted with panic so intense it startled everyone nearby. "Never go down there," she snapped sharply before immediately softening her voice afterward. Back then, Natalie assumed her mother simply stored dangerous tools or private belongings downstairs. Now she realized Eleanor was protecting something else entirely. As Natalie continued reconnecting fragmented childhood memories with evidence hidden inside the basement room, another unsettling realization emerged slowly beneath everything else. She remembered very little about herself before the age of 6 compared to most people. Certain birthdays existed clearly in photographs, but felt emotionally blank in her actual memory. Family stories about her early childhood always sounded strangely rehearsed whenever Eleanor told them publicly. Even the few relatives still alive rarely discussed Natalie's infancy directly. At first, she blamed normal memory loss because childhood recollections fade naturally over time. But once suspicion enters the mind, ordinary gaps start feeling loaded with meaning. Natalie became obsessed with comparing old photographs, medical records, and dates, searching for inconsistencies. The more she searched, the more unstable her understanding of her own family became. Because somewhere beneath decades of silence and carefully buried secrets, Natalie Brooks was beginning to suspect the truth hidden inside the Brooks household might not only explain what happened to Claire. It might explain who Natalie herself really was. The camera jolted violently sideways. Then the tape ended abruptly. No explanation. No context. Just silence. Natalie replayed the clip nearly 20 times that night, trying desperately to understand who Claire feared and why Eleanor Brooks spent decades hiding evidence connected to her disappearance. But perhaps the most horrifying realization was not the fear visible on Claire's face. It was the possibility that Natalie's mother already knew exactly what happened to her all along. After watching the basement footage showing Claire Brooks disappearing near the staircase during that violent argument, Natalie could no longer treat the investigation like a private family mystery. Whatever happened inside the Brooks house during the summer of 1997 had been hidden intentionally for decades, and every new piece of evidence pointed toward multiple people helping bury the truth afterward. Natalie started contacting anyone still alive who might remember details from that period before memories disappeared permanently. The first person she reached was Harold Mercer, a retired detective who worked part of the original Claire Brooks investigation before the case eventually went cold. At first, Mercer refused to discuss anything over the phone, but after Natalie mentioned the VHS tapes and Eleanor's hidden basement room, his entire tone changed immediately. They met 2 days later at a small diner outside Joliet, where Mercer admitted something Natalie never expected to hear. "Your family always frightened me," he said quietly while stirring cold coffee without looking up. According to Mercer, investigators suspected the Brooks household was hiding crucial information almost from the beginning. But every lead collapsed mysteriously. Witnesses changed statements suddenly. Evidence disappeared. Even anonymous tips stopped arriving after certain family members were interviewed privately. Mercer believed someone inside the Brooks family spent years controlling the narrative surrounding Claire's disappearance far more aggressively than police realized publicly. Yet the deeper Natalie investigated, the more conflicting every story became. Former neighbors remembered constant arguments inside the Brooks house during the months before Claire vanished, but nobody agreed on who exactly caused the tension. Some described Claire as emotionally unstable and increasingly paranoid near the end. Others insisted Eleanor controlled the family so tightly nobody dared challenge her openly except Claire. Natalie tracked down one of Claire's old friends from community college who claimed Claire feared someone was watching her constantly throughout 1997. Another former neighbor recalled seeing Thomas Brooks digging near the backyard shed late one night shortly after Claire disappeared, though police never searched the property thoroughly enough to confirm anything suspicious. Then Natalie located Claire's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Reeves, living quietly in Wisconsin under circumstances that immediately felt strange. Daniel admitted Claire contacted him shortly before disappearing, claiming she planned to expose something huge involving Eleanor and hidden family records. But before Natalie could press further, Daniel abruptly refused continuing the conversation and warned her to leave the past alone entirely. "You don't understand what your mother was protecting," he said before ending the interview suddenly. That sentence haunted Natalie afterward because by then she no longer knew whether Eleanor Brooks spent years protecting herself or protecting Natalie from something even worse. Meanwhile, the internet transformed the Brooks family into a full-scale obsession almost overnight after Natalie anonymously uploaded clips from the VHS tapes to a true crime forum seeking information about Claire. Within days, Reddit threads exploded with theories. TikTok creators analyzed the staircase footage frame by frame, searching for hidden details. Amateur investigators compared property records, newspaper archives, and police reports trying to solve a disappearance buried for nearly 3 decades. The case spread far beyond Illinois quickly because audiences became fascinated by the emotional contradictions surrounding the Brooks family. Elegant suburban household, missing young woman, hidden basement room, secret tapes discovered after the matriarch's death. It sounded less like reality and more like the plot of a psychological thriller. Some online communities became convinced Eleanor Brooks murdered Claire intentionally during the argument captured on tape. Others believed Thomas Brooks handled the cover-up afterward while Eleanor protected him publicly. More extreme theories claimed Claire staged her own disappearance entirely using fake identities Natalie discovered inside the basement records. And perhaps most disturbing of all were the growing number of people convinced someone spent years blackmailing the Brooks family silently in exchange for keeping certain truths buried permanently. The constant speculation started destroying Natalie emotionally because the investigation stopped feeling separate from her personal identity completely. She barely slept anymore. Most nights, she stayed awake until sunrise replaying audio tapes, comparing old photographs, and reading theories strangers posted online about her family. Every room inside the house began feeling loaded with hidden meaning. Sometimes she caught herself staring at ordinary childhood objects, wondering whether entire memories connected to them were false somehow. The paranoia spread gradually into everything around her. When distant relatives suddenly stopped returning phone calls after learning Natalie reopened Claire's case, she interpreted the silence as guilt. When she noticed unfamiliar cars parked near the house repeatedly, she convinced herself someone monitored her movements. Even ordinary conversations with old family friends started sounding rehearsed because people avoided direct answers whenever Claire's name surfaced. Natalie realized something terrifying during this period. She no longer trusted her own memories enough to know which parts of childhood were genuine and which parts Eleanor carefully constructed over years of manipulation and silence. Then another unsettling pattern emerged. Natalie started noticing inconsistencies surrounding Claire's relationship to the Brooks family itself. Certain documents listed Claire using different last names during early childhood. Old medical records buried inside Eleanor's journals appeared incomplete or partially altered. Most disturbing was the absence of any official birth certificate matching Claire Brooks before the age of 6. At first, Natalie assumed missing paperwork resulted from outdated record-keeping during the 1970s. But after Mercer quietly helped her access sealed county archives connected to old adoption proceedings, everything changed instantly. Hidden among dozens of unrelated files sat a confidential record involving a young girl placed temporarily into Eleanor and Thomas Brooks' care during the early 1980s after a family scandal involving another woman whose identity remained heavily redacted. The child's original name was blacked out almost entirely, but enough information survived for Natalie to understand the horrifying implication immediately. Claire Brooks may never have been biologically related to Eleanor or Thomas at all. Sitting alone in the basement surrounded by tapes, newspaper clippings, and shattered family narratives, Natalie realized the Brooks family secret was growing far larger than a hidden death. Because if Claire was never truly Eleanor's daughter, then the question became infinitely more disturbing. Why did Eleanor spend decades pretending she was? The hidden adoption records changed everything Natalie Brooks believed about her family within seconds. Sitting alone at the basement desk surrounded by faded documents and half-played VHS tapes, she reread the county files repeatedly, hoping she misunderstood what they implied. According to sealed records from 1981, Claire Brooks entered Eleanor and Thomas Brooks' custody after a private legal arrangement connected to an unnamed family scandal involving another woman whose identity remained heavily redacted. The adoption itself appeared unofficial in several places, almost hidden between temporary guardianship paperwork and altered birth documentation. Claire was never Eleanor's biological daughter. She had been brought into the Brooks household quietly and raised as family, while large portions of her actual origins disappeared beneath sealed legal records. At first, Natalie assumed this explained why Eleanor became so obsessed with controlling appearances and protecting the family reputation publicly. But then another horrifying detail emerged inside medical files Natalie nearly overlooked entirely. Blood type inconsistencies. Maternity dates that did not align correctly. A pediatric hospital record listing Claire Brooks not as Natalie's aunt, but as mother. The realization hit so hard Natalie physically backed away from the desk, unable to breathe properly for several moments. Her hands shook violently, while every memory connected to Eleanor suddenly rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. Natalie Brooks was never Eleanor's daughter at all. She was Claire's child. The room felt smaller instantly after that realization, as though the walls themselves closed inward around her, while years of carefully constructed identity collapsed all at once. Suddenly, childhood memories that once felt merely strange became unbearable. Eleanor's emotional distance. Thomas Brooks' nervous guilt whenever Natalie asked questions about Claire. The hidden photographs showing Claire holding a baby who looked exactly like Natalie. Even the way Eleanor reacted whenever Natalie displayed certain personality traits during adolescence now carried disturbing new meaning. Natalie spent 42 years believing the woman she called Aunt Claire was simply a troubled relative who disappeared tragically before Natalie became old enough to remember her clearly. In reality, Claire Brooks was her mother. And Eleanor spent decades raising Natalie beneath a lie so massive it reshaped every relationship inside the family completely. Natalie began crying uncontrollably there in the basement, not only because of grief or betrayal, but because she suddenly realized her entire life rested on a foundation deliberately constructed from silence and manipulation. Every birthday, every family story, every photograph, every memory attached to Eleanor Brooks now carried an entirely different emotional weight. Then another terrifying question surfaced almost immediately. If Claire was Natalie's biological mother, what actually happened the night she disappeared? Because suddenly the argument captured on the VHS tape no longer looked like a fight between sisters or relatives. It looked like a mother desperately trying to reclaim her own child. Natalie replayed the staircase footage again with this new understanding and noticed details she somehow missed before. Claire repeatedly reached towards someone off camera during the argument while crying hysterically. Eleanor kept screaming phrases about destroying everything and taking her away. Thomas looked terrified rather than angry. The emotional dynamics shifted completely once Natalie understood the truth hidden beneath them. Claire was not threatening the family abstractly. She was threatening to expose the lie Eleanor built around Natalie's identity since infancy. That possibility explained why Eleanor reacted with such panic. Because if Claire took Natalie and revealed the truth publicly, the Brooks family reputation Eleanor spent years protecting would collapse overnight alongside the secret adoption arrangements hidden for decades. Unable to carry the uncertainty anymore, Natalie drove directly to the assisted living facility where Thomas Brooks now lived under constant medical supervision after years of declining health. By then, Thomas looked smaller than Natalie remembered from childhood, fragile in ways difficult to reconcile with the nervous but dependable father figure she once trusted completely. At first, he denied everything automatically the moment Natalie confronted him about Claire and the adoption records. But when she finally placed the pediatric file showing Claire listed as her biological mother directly in front of him, something inside Thomas seemed to break permanently. He started crying almost immediately. Not dramatic crying, exhausted crying. The kind built from carrying unbearable guilt for decades without relief. For several long minutes, he could barely speak clearly enough for Natalie to understand him. Then finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, Thomas admitted the truth Eleanor spent her entire life trying desperately to bury. Claire discovered the adoption documents years after Natalie was born. According to Thomas, Eleanor originally convinced Claire temporarily giving Natalie to the Brooks family would provide stability because Claire struggled financially and emotionally during her early 20s. But over time, Claire regretted the decision deeply and wanted her daughter back permanently. Eleanor refused. The arguments became constant throughout 1997 as Claire threatened legal action and promised to expose the truth publicly if necessary. Then came the stormy night captured partially on the VHS tape. Claire arrived unexpectedly, demanding to leave with Natalie immediately. Eleanor panicked. Thomas admitted the confrontation escalated violently because Eleanor believed losing Natalie would destroy the family entirely. During the struggle near the basement staircase, Claire fell backward after Eleanor grabbed her arm. Thomas insisted Eleanor never intended serious harm, but the fall itself caused catastrophic injuries. Claire died before emergency services were ever contacted. Natalie sat frozen, listening while Thomas described the horrifying silence that followed afterward inside the house. Eleanor refused calling police because she believed prison would separate Natalie from both of them forever. Instead, the family buried the truth alongside Claire's identity itself. The most devastating part of Thomas Brooks' confession came near the end after Natalie asked the question haunting her since discovering the basement room. Did she ever love me? Thomas closed his eyes for several seconds before answering softly. Your mother spent her whole life terrified you'd discover what really happened. That sentence destroyed Natalie more than the confession itself, because suddenly Eleanor Brooks no longer looked like a simple monster hiding secrets for selfish reasons alone. She looked like someone trapped by guilt so enormous it consumed the rest of her life completely. Eleanor spent decades raising Natalie not only as her own daughter, but as living proof of the lie she could never escape afterward. Every moment of distance between them, every controlling rule, every hidden photograph burned quietly during spring cleaning. It all connected back to fear. Fear that Natalie would someday uncover the truth about Claire Brooks and realize the woman she trusted most spent 42 years hiding the fact she helped erase Natalie's real mother from existence. After leaving the assisted living facility that night, Natalie Brooks drove back to the house in complete silence, while rain drifted softly across the windshield almost exactly the way it had the night she first discovered the hidden room downstairs. But nothing about the house felt familiar anymore. Every room now carried the emotional weight of a lie stretching across her entire life. The woman she called Mom was actually the person who helped erase her real mother from existence. The man she trusted as her quiet, harmless father spent decades helping conceal the truth after Claire Brooks died at the bottom of the basement staircase. Even Natalie's own name suddenly felt strange inside her mind because it belonged to an identity carefully constructed by Eleanor Brooks after Claire disappeared forever. Yet despite all the horror Thomas confessed, one question still remained unanswered. Why did Eleanor keep the tapes at all? She could have destroyed them decades earlier. She could have erased every remaining trace of Claire completely. Instead, Eleanor preserved everything inside that hidden room, almost like part of her wanted Natalie to eventually uncover the truth after she was gone. That question pulled Natalie back downstairs one final time just before sunrise. Inside the basement, Natalie sat alone, surrounded by scattered photographs, police reports, journals, and cassette tapes while the old television hummed softly nearby. That was when she noticed another VHS tape hidden beneath Eleanor's journals, wrapped carefully inside a faded baby blanket. Unlike the others, this one contained no warning label. Only a handwritten date from late August 1997, less than 2 weeks before Claire disappeared. Natalie hesitated before pressing play because by then she understood every tape carried the power to permanently reshape another piece of her life. But eventually curiosity overcame fear once again. Static flickered briefly across the screen before the image slowly cleared. Claire Brooks appeared sitting alone inside what looked like a cheap motel room, holding a baby wrapped gently against her chest. Natalie froze immediately because even before Claire spoke, she recognized the child. It was her. The same eyes. The same tiny birthmark near the collarbone visible in old childhood photographs. Claire looked exhausted, terrified, and emotionally shattered in ways impossible to fake. Tears streamed down her face while she adjusted the camera nervously several times before finally whispering words Natalie would remember for the rest of her life. If you're watching this, they won. For several seconds, Claire simply held baby Natalie silently while trying unsuccessfully to stop crying. Then she continued, speaking through visible panic. "I tried to take you with me," she whispered softly while kissing the baby's forehead. "I swear to God I tried." Natalie completely broke apart emotionally at that moment, because hearing Claire say those words transformed everything from tragic mystery into something unbearably human. For years, Natalie imagined Claire as a distant, missing woman buried beneath rumors and newspaper headlines. But now she was seeing her real mother alive for the first time. Frightened, desperate, still fighting to protect her daughter even while believing she might fail. Claire explained she recorded the tape because Eleanor threatened taking Natalie permanently if Claire continued trying to expose the adoption records publicly. She admitted she no longer trusted anyone around the Brooks family enough to protect the truth if something happened to her. "Your grandmother thinks she's saving you," Claire said quietly through tears. "But people who love control will always call it protection." Then the tape abruptly ended after Claire looked nervously toward someone knocking outside the motel room door. Natalie sat motionless in front of the television long after the screen faded into static. The emotional devastation hit from every direction simultaneously because the truth refused fitting neatly into simple categories anymore. Eleanor Brooks absolutely helped bury Claire's death and erase Natalie's identity. There was no escaping that horror now. But Thomas's confession and Claire's final tape also revealed something even more complicated underneath the cruelty. Eleanor genuinely believed Natalie would live a safer and more stable life away from Claire. According to Thomas, Claire struggled with emotional instability, financial desperation, and increasing paranoia during the months before her death. Eleanor convinced herself Natalie would suffer growing up inside that chaos. Somewhere along the line, Protecting Natalie and controlling Natalie became emotionally inseparable inside Eleanor's mind. That realization unsettled Natalie more than pure evil would have, because monsters are easier to understand than people who commit terrible acts while believing they are saving someone they love. Looking back across her childhood suddenly became emotionally unbearable because Natalie could now see traces of Eleanor's guilt hidden everywhere. The overprotectiveness, the obsession with reputation and structure, the emotional distance mixed strangely with constant control. Eleanor spent 42 years raising the child of the woman whose death she helped conceal. Every birthday party, every school graduation, every family dinner carried the silent weight of Claire Brooks sitting invisibly between them. Natalie realized Eleanor never truly escaped the consequences of what happened in 1997. She simply buried them beneath routines, silence, and carefully constructed family narratives while hoping the truth would remain hidden long enough for Natalie to live a normal life untouched by it. But secrets that enormous rarely stay buried forever. Eventually, they begin leaking through cracks in memory, tension, and silence until someone finally uncovers what everyone else worked desperately to forget. As morning light slowly entered the basement through tiny windows near the ceiling, Natalie remained sitting alone, surrounded by old tapes and faded family photographs, while generations of deception settled heavily around her. For the first time in her life, she understood who Claire Brooks truly was. Not a runaway, not a scandal, not the dangerous family destroyer Eleanor described during childhood. Claire was her mother, a frightened young woman trying desperately to reclaim her daughter before disappearing forever inside a family secret powerful enough to reshape multiple lives permanently. And perhaps the most painful part of all was realizing Eleanor Brooks may have loved Natalie genuinely, while simultaneously destroying the truth of where she came from. That contradiction stayed with Natalie long after the investigation ended because it forced a question no simple answer could resolve. If protecting someone requires destroying the truth, is it still protection? Stories like Natalie Brooks stay with people long after they end because they force us into emotional territory most families spend generations avoiding. It would be easier if Eleanor Brooks had simply been cruel. Easier if the truth fit neatly into categories like good and evil, victim and villain, right and wrong. But real family secrets rarely work that way. The most painful truths often exist inside complicated people making terrible decisions while convincing themselves they are protecting the people they love. Eleanor helped bury Claire Brooks' death. She erased Natalie's identity. She spent 42 years building an entire life around silence and deception. Yet at the same time, she raised Natalie, protected her financially, cared for her through childhood illnesses, celebrated birthdays, attended graduations, and spent decades terrified that the truth would someday emotionally destroy the daughter she believed she saved. That contradiction is what makes this story feel so unsettling, because it forces people to confront the possibility that love and damage can sometimes exist inside the same person at the exact same time. And maybe that is why Natalie's story became such an obsession online after the truth finally surfaced. Millions of people watched the investigation unfold because deep down, many recognized pieces of their own families hidden inside it. Not necessarily murder or missing persons cases, but silence. Secrets. Subjects nobody discusses openly at holidays. Relatives erased quietly from family history after uncomfortable events. Parents protecting children from truths they believe are too painful to survive emotionally. Every family carries stories buried beneath the surface somewhere. The Brooks family simply carried one large enough to destroy identities completely once uncovered. But the emotional question at the center of everything still remains disturbingly difficult to answer. Was Eleanor Brooks protecting Natalie from instability and chaos she genuinely believed would ruin her life? Or was she protecting herself from the consequences of what happened to Claire in that basement during the summer of 1997? The horrifying part is that both answers might be true at the same time. Natalie eventually inherited the house, the tapes, the photographs, and every painful truth hidden inside them. But perhaps the hardest thing she inherited was uncertainty itself. Because once someone discovers their entire life was built on carefully constructed lies, trust becomes almost impossible to rebuild completely. Childhood memories stop feeling reliable. Love becomes complicated. Even grief changes shape because Natalie lost two mothers in different ways. Claire Brooks disappeared before Natalie ever truly knew her. Eleanor Brooks spent decades hiding the truth while still loving Natalie in the only broken way she understood how. And somewhere between those two women sits a question that continues haunting everyone who hears this story. If you discovered your family buried a truth this devastating for your entire life, would you want to know it? Or are there some secrets so destructive that exposing them only creates more pain than silence ever could? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe Eleanor Brooks was protecting Natalie or protecting herself all along? Can love ever justify a lie this massive? And if you were in Natalie's position, would you have opened that basement door knowing it could destroy everything you believed about your family forever? Stories like this remind us that sometimes the scariest truths are not hidden by strangers. They are hidden by the people sitting beside us at dinner tables, smiling in family photographs, and telling us they only want what's best for us. And if you thought this family secret was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened inside the next house. So subscribe and turn on notifications because the next story might change the way you look at family forever.